Well, appreciate being here with you again. And so, what our topic of this year is going to be about storage tanks for micronutrients. And this is an area that has grown in popularity, use of micronutrients. And you think of all the different elements that have come out: zinc, manganese, molybdenum, and sulfur. Though it's not a micronutrient, I'm kind of lumping into that. And so, over the last 5 years, 6, 10 years, this has become extremely important. And so one of the questions that's come out of this is what storage tank should we be using? And so what we want to do is answer that, but before I can go specifically to those, I want to talk about each one of these tanks. Poly tanks, fiberglass, carbon steel, stainless steel, sort of an overview. It's just sort of a primer so that you can get a better feel of why I'm going to be making the recommendation that we are at the end. So we have publications on all of these tanks. The first one is Poly Tanks, and that's the publication that started out a lot of this tank stuff for me. And so if you notice that typically you and I will know what these are. These are storage tanks, and these are transport tanks. They're built differently, they're manufactured differently, and we're used to those tanks. So these are transport tanks that are meant to go on the road. And then obviously these are poly tanks that are meant to go on the ground. And the reason we want these on the ground is because the manufacturer will thick them up, and I always say about knee high here. And the idea here is as we load and unload these tanks, this plastic is expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting. All right. And so what we don't want to see is these round tanks, though it's common because they fit really well on a trailer. And you can see right here, they're not meant for this sort of putting on trucks. And then we also have the additional issue that when we carry these, we're trying to figure out ways of actually holding them on to the trailers. And here you can see what we're trying to do, not to cut through this plastic. These tabs there are really meant for transporting empty tanks, not carrying full tanks. So at best, they're weak spots. And then you try to secure them and hold them down, you can actually collapse the side. And so what I'm really interested in this one here is at least he's consistent that he has collapsed that one, and that one. So they're all tied on well. It's very difficult to get these pieces of plastic when they're full to be able to stay well. Now, what I want to introduce is something that maybe we don't think much about. So instead of the flat bottom storage tank, what we're doing, we want to look at this cone bottom tanks. And we're going to be bringing this up over and over, that with the micronutrients, we like this better than we do these flat bottom fiberglass, flat bottom poly tanks. And we'll talk more about that as we go. Now, when we look at these poly tanks, just a little bit of review, these tanks come in 3 densities, 1.0, 1.5, 1.9. And a 1.0 tank is meant to hold the weight of water. That's how they're designed, so about 8 pounds. A 1.5 density tank is going to hold about 1.5 times the weight of water, roughly 12 pounds. And you can see that that's my fertilizer and salts are falling into that weight. It's a heavier material, so it needs a little bit more of a dense tank. And then a 1.9 that I don't see a lot of out there, I'm not sure why, holds about twice the amount of water. And so that's about 17 pounds. It's you know, let's say a pretty dense material. A reason we bring that up is, as we'll need to know later on with the micronutrients, what the weight per gallon is to make sure that the tanks that we're going to be using or ordering can meet that specification. And here you're actually seeing the density of the tank is a 1.5. Unfortunately, it's these little plastic tags that come off, but you can sometimes, if you're lucky, look on the lid, around the lid opening, and you're able to find, if you don't have your paperwork, you're able to find a code. So for this case, I could call Snyder and ask them what that tank is based on that code that's around the lid. Now, people often get confused and they tell me yellow is better, blue is yellow, red is better, white is better. And the colors have nothing, mean nothing. The colors are a marketing tool that the manufacturers use to separate their tanks. So, and I'm going to make this up, one manufacturer may have the whites as a density of 1.0, maybe their blues as a 1.5, and maybe the yellows as a 1.9. So the color is only a marketing, it's just coloring that's added to the plastic. It has nothing to do with strength per se, it's more with the marketing. So what started this out, and the reason as we talk about poly tanks, and this particular farmer had a tank to blow out on them. It was filled 2,500 with fertilizer. So when I got there, I realized how little I knew, and this again started this whole, how do we select tanks? So let's watch a couple of movies, and in fact, I'll ask you here, what is the #1 enemy of tanks? And that is sunlight breaking it down. And so with sunlight, then it breaks it down. And if you can imagine, I was storing fertilizer in a 1.0 tank. That's a tank that's basically not designed to hold the heavier fertilizer. Along with the sunlight, you could see why breaking it down.
Our guess is that it started right here. And in fact, it makes sense because if you think about it, you can see how high off the tank that we are right here. I mean, it broke here in the middle, broke right here, and this whole piece just split. Look at the jagged edges on it. You can see that it just broke in a number of different pieces. It had such power that what it did when it started to split, you can see here where the valve is. It was actually where I'm standing. So when it started splitting and started breaking, it swung this whole thing around the top of it, and it started splitting right here. Here is the base, and there's the outside of the tank, and it has just swung this whole thing on the outside out. And again, if you look where it broke, it's all through this middle piece. Another 2 foot high on the inside right here. And again, you can kind of see the edges. This tank held fertilizer, starter fertilizer, and we're looking at probably around $3,500, $4,000 worth of material gone. And we're looking at probably about a $1,000 tank to replace this 2,500 gallon tank.
Okay, and so this case, the question is why, and what we want to do is get you to focus on this this UV business of breaking.
So somebody's going to ask us which bat we use. So it's made in Louisville, so it's the real bat.
This is my partner here whose tanks it were, and his son is on
You're looking at the back? Tell me when you're ready.
Well, here I am, supposed to be a safety guy, and I'm hitting this plastic, and I got the cameraman right there in front of me. To this day, he's still got a piece of plastic stuck in his head. But nevertheless, you
can you see me from there?
How brittle this is.
Yeah, I'm looking through the hole. So what I'm going to do is, John, if you'll scoot over a little bit so I don't knock the piece back at you, I'm going to try it again, and again, we'll just take another picture.
Okay. Again, you can see that this has no bounce.
We've got a couple recommendations to take a look at where we can do some inspection.
So what we're going to do now is, I can't give you a date, whether it's 6 or 8 years. It all depends on how much you fill these tanks, what the density is, was it out in the light. But there is a pin check that we're going to do, and we're going to watch Mike Titus here show us how to do a pin test. Now, this pin that Mike is using is not a permanent ink, and what we're going to be showing you is if there's any cracks in it from the sunlight, the ink is going to go inside of it, and from that, then when he wipes it off, he won't be able to get the stuff that's on the inside where you can see the crazing or the cracks. Okay, so let's watch what Mike does.
Besides just a visual inspection of the overall tank,
we can use a couple other methods, and one of those is by using a water-soluble pen. And basically what this is doing is giving us kind of an early detection of deterioration of this material. Now the deterioration we're looking for is basically the UV or ultraviolet light from the sun, and for the most part, we're going to kind of start looking at the upper part of the tank because this is the most exposure to the sunlight from above.
So what Mike's doing here is taking the non-permanent, it's like a whiteboard pen, and he's just going to wipe it off.
The crazing and the deterioration of the tank.
And we're going to show you a close-up here, and you can actually see all of these marks. Looks like dry rot, alligator skin, checkerboard, whatever you want to call it. That's a sign that the tank is beginning to break down. Now, here is another one, again, showing you those lines and the cross-hatching, the dry rot look. And then some of them you don't even need a pen. This was one, I mean, obviously this is way beyond its useful life at this particular point. Now, being the way things are here in Indiana, it ain't broke till it's broken.
We've got some bad spots.
So we're going to ask you to take a bat to it. And we got a bad
We ought
spot
to be
here.
able to hit this tank. If the tank is bad, it ought to crack. So let's see if this tank under the pressure is bad enough to crack.
And so what Mike's doing is just testing how brittle that is. So it looks like it's holding up.
Any cracks? Any cracks? This tank, though, has got the first signs. It still takes that, but we would still have some concerns if this was carrying pesticides, if we had a break, probably fertilizer would come next. This would be a good water tank.
So, you know what, we'd rather not use it when it shows those signs of crazing and the beginning of crack, but at least put the bat test to it to see. And so what we're going to see here is Mike actually doing that.
Part of this area behind. This doesn't show the oxidation that this shows up here. We have a better example to show it, which
It shows how ultraviolet light does affect
starts that deterioration process.
So, Mike, you be the man of the day. Hit us a home run here.
And so you can see that tank there is just as hard as a rock.
And I didn't swing
and he
exceptionally
cracked
hard,
it.
but it was a good firm hit, and we've actually caused damage to this tank. This is a good test that this tank needs to come out of surface. Oh, shoot.
Now, John, if you can come over here and look at the side, you can just see now. You ought to see it on this side. It's pretty.
And as you can see, with a good firm hit, we've caused some significant damage to this tank.
And so no matter where I hit this
About as
tank,
hard as you get there.
it's cracking. So that's an example of why that bat's important. Now people say, well, it wasn't broken, now you're broken. Well, that's the whole point. If it couldn't withstand the bat test, then you shouldn't be storing things or putting things on the road in those kind of poor condition tanks. Another area that over the last few years that we've been seeing is cracks that are around the openings here. Okay. And so that these particular, as I get a hose here and I'm going up and down on it, it's putting a lot of pressure on that wall of the tank. And you can see here one that broke, that spilled all of its contents. Here is another one. And so we actually would like to do some tests around, and it takes all of 5 minutes, somewhere around on these storage tanks of knee high, around a couple of spots, and then around the bung. Now, another downside to the into the poly tanks, instead of we have the sunlight problem, is they really can't be repaired. Now, here's a case that somebody said somebody should put a bullet hole through it, and so they tried fixing it, and I guess, you know, it's in a dike, but, you know, they shouldn't be fixed, and no, you can't take a torch to it and melt it to try to melt a hole over It might be good for a garbage can. I remember this one, I'll never forget it. The guy, it's stored with beer cans. And I said, what's all this? What's all this beer for? He said, I'm saving up for my son's education. I'm recycling. And I said, wouldn't it be cheaper not to, to save the money and not buy the beer? He said, no, but it wouldn't be near as much fun. So I've never forgotten that. And when I retire, that'll be a story that I'll take with me. All right. And so poly tanks then, an excellent tank, can hold up the corrosive materials. We got to worry about sunlight. We got to make sure we buy the right density tank, and we have to do some inspections. So there's nothing wrong with them. And realize, and we'll do this over and over, that if you have these larger tanks, you're going to have to pay additional costs for transportation. So there's the price of the tank plus transportation. All right, so fiberglass tanks, another publication we have, and when you look here, there'll be a number here in the corner. When we give you our website at the end, you can look up the publications, or you can get your copy if you need it. So you'll notice here the way this works. I've got both the resin. I got two different guns here, same gun but shooting different things. So this line, we're going to have fiber, and then this one is the resin. And so I'm mixing a resin up with the material. And here you can see that we're making a lid as an example. And then what they're going to do is to put fiberglass all around it to hook that top to the tank. And so they're actually going to use a mold. They're going to be, again, you can see how they're doing it here. We're shooting the materials onto the tank. Here's more materials going onto the tank, trying to give us that tank. And then here you can see that's the mold, and here we're pulling the fiberglass tank off. The reason I'm showing you this is most of our fiberglass tanks you're going to have to order from your manufacturer, and that's going to take time. And here it is actually coming off of the tank. And so you've got your openings that were part of the manufacturing process. And now you'll have to have this man here who's actually going to have to put the fiberglass around it, seal it up, put the manways on it, and get everything cured and fixed. Okay, so that takes time. Now, we oftentimes, because it has a resin in it, we oftentimes, if it goes outside, or in this case inside, this particular person decided not to get the outside painted to protect that resin. Now, the good news about any of these fiberglass tanks, which is I can have some pretty heavy duty plumbing, hoses, and the rest of that, and that's really an advantage in many particular cases. Then there's others that people will actually paint, as we're seeing here, and put it inside. But I know if you're putting it outside, you need to go ahead and spend that extra money getting it painted. So a fiberglass tank is really a good tank. We are back to looking at the cone shape. Again, we'll come back to that so that we can completely drain out the tank. The fiberglass tank can be fixed. In this case, you're looking on the outside, and I can reset the fibers with paint. I'm going to have the same problem as I had with the larger poly tanks. It's going to take trucks to bring them in. It's going to be extra cost on transportation on top of what the tank costs. And again, just watching people put these in place. So a fiberglass tank is an excellent tank. But what we're going to talk about later, because of the corrosive nature of many of our micronutrients, what we're going to want to do is to have an additional liner put in, and that's called a veil. I think that's sort of a universal name, and this veil gives this extra protection on the inside to keep it that much more off of the resin. So we'll have to ask for that when we order. Then lastly, we have our steel tanks. This happens to be number 105. On the steel tank, specifically carbon steel. Most of you are familiar with it. It's been a tank that we've used for, well, I don't know, hundreds of years, I guess. for a long time. And the problem is with many of these tanks that what you want to make sure is when you buy a tank, it may look like it's welded all the way around the seams, but when you look on the inside, you could see where it's not made that way on the inside. And so what we want to do is when you order any one of these carbon steel, mild steel tanks, you want to look at this production. You want to see that this is a quality tank because this is where stuff is going to seep into it. And because of it's a mild steel, whether it's a gas tank that we have or anything, things rust. And that's always the issue with these tanks. And again, once you could see it, because once we get a hole in it, or a small leak, you could actually see it rusting on the outside. Okay, and so here is one that is actually eating it through the weld. Now, good news is these can be fixed as well if it's not too bad. This guy made a point that he appreciated a talk that I did years and years ago because he started looking at his tanks and realized that his carbon steel tank, mild steel tanks, were really in deplorable condition. It was the rust that was keeping it together. So that's always going to be an issue. Now, with a flat bottom tank, we have the problem that I can't clean out all the stuff that's salted out, settled out. So here you're looking in a tank, and what we're doing is actually stirring it up, okay? And then going to put the fertilizer back in the solution, and then going to pump it out to clean the tank and to do an inspection. And then what we're going to do then is once we got it all pumped out, we're actually going to then clean it out. And we're going to do an inspection of the tank. And what I want to show you is things like when you start looking at the pitting and the corrosion. Here is another one showing it. Now, what I want to do is have this discussion from within a tank. We're going to have inside of this tank, you're going to see us in it, taking a look all the way up where you see the corrosion taking place.
We're doing good. Again, I really appreciate you letting
Now,
us
this
come
is
here
Mike
to the
Titus with
facilities.
Co-Alliance.
No problem. Tell me what you do for Co-Alliance.
Well, Fred, I'm a risk coordinator for Co-Alliance LLP, and we do a number of things within our department. We do some training, we do regulatory compliance, and we do some emergency response. But the big job for our department is make sure that our plants are running smoothly and safely, and that we're treating our partners within the community in a good way.
You betcha.
So keeping them safe as well.
You betcha. So, which brings us here to this facility. So we've got a tank that's going to be coming out of service.
Yes.
But what's really nice, this is like I said, a couple of decades old, and it's a good way to see what happens toward the end of a tank's life.
Sure.
But more importantly, you can see some of the decisions on whether you replace a tank or not. Because I know these things are expensive, but they do have a finite life.
Yes.
So this is a mild steel tank, and as I was looking around the outside, Mike, I noticed what looked like somebody tried to make or did make a repair here.
Yes. Sometimes in the older tanks, we would find seams. Maybe they were more prevalent in a seam in the weld, and in this particular case, we had a problem right here, and so we made a decision to weld that up, and it's done well. It's held for a long time. This tank has been good to us.
You bet. Now, a couple days ago, one of the guys was doing their regular daily maintenance inspection, yes. And what did they find?
Well, as they were walking around doing their visual inspection, they're looking for seeps, they're looking for places that come out of a pit, maybe, or whatever, and has seeped a little bit. But in this case, over underneath the manway, they found a place where it had seeped down into the stone, and there's obviously a leak right there, and so we took it out of service and pumped it out.
Okay. Now, if it had been for that, Mike, and we had another leak somewhere else, that would have been necessary for us to probably go inside to evaluate the inside.
Yes, that's probably.
Now, what we're going to do then, what I want to do is to actually, there's different tests on the outside, but what I want to do
More
is
than I am.
to take you inside.
Next
the
step
tank.
would be to get inside, Fred, and take a look.
And I've been looking forward to that, Mike. Let's get in there and see what we can see.
You're looking forward to it more than I am.
All right.
So we're going to crawl in the
Mike, we're
tank.
inside this tank here. And nothing really exciting. It's nothing that there's nothing unusual here. I mean, in terms of this is what it looks like. And you can see up and down. I'm seeing material that dried up fertilizer. And we can actually see some of the metal. And, you know, in lots of these places, you know, it looks like the metal's pretty good, doesn't it?
Except, like here, you had a place, and then if you kind of pick there a little bit, you are going to start to see a small pit.
Yeah, and that is the pit, and that's what it's just starting. So we still got some liquid down here, but what I want we could do here, Mike, is if I see some of these piles of stuff here, if you can pick up a pile, let's take a look at it. Just go ahead and pick it up, and if you can bring it over here and let me see what we got here. And so it looks like it's probably what, half dozen different things.
Yes, there's some rust in here. There's probably some byproduct from the manufacturing of the material. But you see a lot of chunks right here. That's erosion from the container itself.
Okay.
And this is normal that we would find.
And this is why we like to check these tanks every 3 years or whenever.
It's a given.
To be able to wash this stuff out, because that's the last thing I need in my sprayers.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we have some corrosion on the bottom here. And Mike, the concern that we have is this is a 1/4 inch thick, is that correct?
That's correct.
So what we're worried about is how much of that wall is actually corroded of that thickness. And we actually have a way of measuring this, because a person would come in here and say, oh man, this looks bad. Well, it doesn't look bad. It looks like an inside of a fertilizer tank. But there is an important thing. You've got some mark here, I think, right?
Yes. This was a spot that we identified that we wanted to look at just a little bit, and we can probably go a little farther. There's probably multiple places like this.
And again, without belaboring the point, that's an issue with mild steel tank, and you'll see how we make our recommendation, because some of these materials are even are so acidic that we would be concerned about these tanks being able to store these materials. I will make a note, if you're ever in a storage tank such as this is under the OSHA rules. Mike's got an oxygen meter there. In fact, we were about getting close to the end of what we were trying to do with this taping when the alarms went off, and which told us we needed to leave to get out of the tank. And again, you'll see the way that it's done here. You can see the straps, you can see all of that harnesses. So in the event that Mike and I would have went down, we were tethered to a rope that we could have been drug out to the opening. So pretty serious. But the key thing here is that these particular things do have problems. And just like you do on all the other tanks, we keep bringing it up. Anytime you order any large tank, you're going to now have to have, in this case, a crane and extra cost. The last one on the steel tanks is the stainless steel. And it's one that we've always viewed as being top line, top of everything. We paid for that because they would not rust for the most part. They were easy to clean out, lots of different characteristics that we liked. But what we're going to find out here as we go through here, that there are 2 grades of steel. And for many of us, we have always gotten by with the 304 steel. That particular tank is not quite as, this 316 tank here is a more refined tank with less carbon in it. So again, I want to go back. A 304 tank that you're going to see here in a couple of minutes versus a 316 tank, and why we're going to be making recommendations a little bit later. I didn't have a good picture of basically a big tank sloping, but the idea was that to get like the rest of them, anytime I can get a tank that drains to a sump, or I have a cone-shaped tank, it's going to be better to empty things out. Now, we spent a long time looking at tanks because I wanted to give you an overview, a better feel for the tanks. So let's do the micronutrients. And so what we're going to do is ask a series of questions and then answer them and show you what at least our answer is based on the work that we've done so far. So they're formulated, and a lot of these are chelated. Now, without going into a lot of chemistry here, which I don't know, but this chelated, for the most part, drops the pH and makes this stuff a lot more acidic. And you can see here, and you're saying, Fred, this can't be, but putting in an acidic material in some of these 304 tanks, you can see here the end results, and you can see here the end results. Depending on the acidity and the quality of the tank, then some of these can fail pretty quickly. Others, it's going to take longer. But nevertheless, you're not going to get the useful life out of it. This is a 304, and I've just flipped it around where you could see it. And so it's just not only the tanks that we're worried about, it's any of the plumbing metal materials that we use. And you can see here the corrosion that is taking place based on putting in the wrong nipples, the wrong pipes, the wrong adapters, or the case may be. So here is an example, a 316 tank, good tank, would be good for most of these materials. But when they actually did some work on it to adapt it to their need, we were thinking that what they did was they used the 304 fittings and those kind of nipples and those things. And again, you can see here the corrosion. Now, so this is why it's important to know whether you have a 304 and a 316. This one here, they couldn't find the data plate, so they just wrote down 316 in a pen as an indication of what this tank is. Sort of surprised me, I guess, but and I overreacted at first, and so I'm thinking, well, no, this poly tanks can do that. It's not the plastic. But what we think is it's not the plastic here that's leaking this material out. It's probably on the inside, and it's going to be the O-ring. It's going to be anything that's keeping this stuff from leaking. This material, some of these micronutrients, if they stay in the line long enough, they're going to eat a lot of the gaskets, O-rings, and those kind of things. So it's going to be pretty important to look at this and to ask questions. And here you can see the same sorts of things taking place. So we want to make sure that if the line is going to be full, that this stuff won't eat it. All right. Now, I'm thinking right now that the pumps are not going to be an issue because we're using these pumps to pump out multiple chemicals. We don't have a pump for every single line. And so my guess is that this is not going to be an issue on pumps. Right now, that's my best guess. And so is the tank compatible with specific micronutrients? Here is some that it was giving me a pH of a low as 1.2 to 11 from battery acid to bleach. And so if you think about those caustic materials, I believe that my recommendation that mild steel tanks and stainless 304 and their fittings are not going to be tanks that I would want to use on pure products. And when I mean pure products, it's straight boron, zinc, or whatever. Now, it might be that mild steel might be useful when some of these tanks are being filled with the blend of products. They're diluted down. But if you're going to use a mild steel tank or a 304, ask the manufacturer, either of the tank or the micronutrient, can these tanks hold this material? Another question is the tank designed to remove the micronutrients? And because many of these will fall out, much like the fertilizer, not all, but some. And so what I want to do is to get a cone-shaped tank as an example that I'm able to empty out the tank completely. and not have to mess around with getting on the inside. Kind of my goal here is to find a tank that can hold everything and not have multiple tanks with different kinds of tanks, and keep it really, really simple. And so if I can have a tank such as this one here that slopes to the middle, and basically like a sump, then that's even better than a flat bottom tank. So I think that not only have I eliminated the 304 in the mild steel tank, I'm also going to eliminate the flat bottom tanks if I have a choice in the matter. Now, can you keep the micronutrients from freezing? We're going to see how this plays out, but if you can't, you need to make sure of whether or not this micronutrient, after it warms up, goes back in suspension, is still effective. I would rather see you doing what this guy's doing, this retailer, and he's actually taken, I think, if I remember right, that this was zinc and this is sulfur, and he's actually pumping out the tanks at the end and filling up these basically these old shuttles and storing them on the inside. Now, what size tank will I need? If you're probably looking at somewhere around 11,000, and we're looking at this 11,000 sort of as a break point, because depending on what the manufacturers can make the largest poly tank. So let's assume it's 11,000. It could be 12 or 13, or your manufacturer could be 9. Whatever their largest tank is, you know what? I'm thinking that a poly tank is really a good choice here for holding all of these materials. If I'm going above that magic number, 11, 12, 13,000, then I'm forced to look at fiberglass or stainless 316. And again, the reason for that is I don't have access to poly tanks that are going to be that large. Now, it may be in the future they do, but then I would be looking at fiberglass that has that extra veil, that extra layer when I order it, and the stainless 316. When you're ordering your tanks, just spend a couple of minutes getting the height and the circumference around the tank, because we have had a bunch of folks that have had to really work hard to get this stuff into it. This one here had to get pushed in. They couldn't even drive it in. They had to push it in because of the clearance. So just make sure you look up and you look around, so when you get the tank to your place, it's gonna fit. And then when the tank comes in, the larger tanks that are left outside, we would like to see you basically have securement devices on it where we could actually tie them down so that the wind would not blow them over, in which we've had that over the years. When will I need the tank? If you need the tank now, you got some issues, because poly is about the only one you're going to get. And I don't see personally a lot of cone-shaped tanks. Poly flat, I can pick up anywhere. Cone shape, I may have to order. If I'm looking for something larger, than what is normally found, the 2,500 gallons, then I am having to plan ahead, because as you saw, the fiberglass is going to be manufactured, and the stainless steel 316, it becomes option in the larger poly tanks, but you got to plan ahead, because a lot of this is going to be made on demand, customer driven, order driven. And then you got to, be concerned about having a crane operator with many of these to install the larger tanks. And that's going to take a little bit of work on your part to coordinate from the tank manufacturer delivering your tank to your property, whether it's ag retail or a farmer, and then being there to remove it. Because if you mismatch those two, the tank coming and the operator there, then you're going to be paying this crane operator a lot more money for just sitting. And what we're talking about is this right here, being able to load and unload the products. Okay. Now, the last condition is this right here. Micronutrients are considered by the Office of Indiana State Chemist to be considered a fertilizer. And as such, they fit into the bulk storage regulations. Now, I'm going to defer if you're from any other state listening to this, that in fact, that might be a different interpretation. So you need to ask the question, but here it is. So if I'm over 7,500 gallons of fertilizer, including the micronutrients, then I am in the storage regulations. Now, we're not going to go over that now. That's not the point, but I would be in. So it might be that that you choose not to want to do the storage regulation, the diking, the sumps, the offload area, and the walls and all that stuff, that you might decide that tank size may become more of an important issue of going smaller than larger. Okay, so what you're looking here is a table, and what you're seeing is, at least how we're seeing it at this particular moment. So the poly tank, is it compatible with the micronutrients? It's yes. If I had my choice, I would get a cone bottom tank that would allow me to completely drain the tank. I'm going to say, you know, probably can get a tank that's up to 11,000, again, depending on the manufacturer. So those can be obtained. Anything above that, you're probably looking at fiberglass and stainless. For the larger tanks, it's going to take a while to get them there, and you can kind of see a rough price per gallon, basically $1 to $2 a gallon is what it's going to cost, if my estimates are close. Fiberglass is an excellent product as well. It's compatible with micronutrients, as long as you get that additional protection against corrosion. In fact, let me back up a little bit. So the poly that we described should work for all of your micronutrients. The fiberglass with that veil should work for all micronutrients. And what you're looking for is a sloped floor to be able to drain it. And you're probably going to be looking at something at the larger tanks. And again, you can see it's in that $1 to $2 range, but obviously you're going to be paying a lot more money because your tanks are going to be holding more product. A mild steel tank right now, we would say no, because we have some products that would be pretty tough on them. Secondly, the caveat to that might be, again, that these blended products that we get delivered, that's not pure product, it's a mixture of products. That might be an asterisk that we could put that, but boy, that's going to require you to ask some questions. A stainless steel 304, we are going to say, again, is very limited. It's going to be probably with that blend of materials. Again, just like the mild steel, if I had my druthers, I would want to stay away from those as well. But if you decide to get a 304, the manufacturer says, yep, it'll hold it. You want to do the same thing as stainless steel, the cone, float bottom, slope floor. The advantage, obviously, of the 304, it's about 25% cheaper than 316 as I'm speaking today. And then the last one is stainless steel. We're looking at 316, compatible material. I would be looking for cone bottoms for the smaller tanks. I would be looking for the slope floor on the larger tanks. It's going to take me a while to get those tanks made on order. And you can see here, the price of the smaller tanks is about $3 to $5 a gallon, a couple of bucks for the larger tanks. Now, when we say this, the cost, the delivery time, those things are going to vary depending on, just depends, as you know, pricing and delivery always varies on lots of different things. All right. So when we sum this up, we're thinking the best buy. And again, this is subject to change as we learn more, but if I'm under that 11,000, 12, 13, whatever is my largest tank that a poly will bring, I think the poly tank makes the best choice, especially with the cone bottom. It's less expensive. I can use them for multiple products. I don't have the concern about corrosion. And so for me, that would be my choice right now, would be to go poly. If I'm storing these larger tanks, I would probably be going with fiberglass with a sloped floor. And the reason I would be doing that is, again, it can hold all the materials. I don't have to worry about corrosion with those as well. They can be fixed and all of that, and then maybe a second would be the better stainless steel. But even there would be a little bit of concern about corrosion. So that would be our best buy now, would be fiberglass with the slope floor. And again, the idea is I want a tank that can actually hold up over time, so I don't have to keep buying these tanks. So bottom line is, the only way you're really going to know is to talk to the people that your tank distributor, and then asking them the questions, and then being able for them to go back to the manufacturer of those tanks, whether it's poly, fiber, or mild steel or stainless steel tanks, and also the micronutrient, because we're making some general statements here with some ideas that should help you, but boy, it takes a little bit of homework. So because of that, what we've done is we put these here at the end of the talk. So then in the event you can download these questions, or at least write them down or have access to them. These are questions that would help you then to be able to decide for yourself which of the tanks are best for your micronutrients. Again, we offered our recommendations, and we would see what your manufacturers of both the tanks and the micronutrients would say. So right now we have a draft. We're working on the cover. I just wanted to show you that we have it, that this is the next tank in our series of publication, selecting the right tank for micronutrients. It has some of the criteria that we talked about here, plus a few other ones here. Again, I'm Fred with Purdue. There is my phone number. You can call me about it. There is my email if you have specific questions for me. This is our website where all of the publications can be ordered from. And if you would like to be on our mailing list to get this publication to you at no cost, then what I've done here is just send me an email, and when this thing comes out, I'll send you a copy. And so right now it's in a draft. We're reviewing the draft. It still has to be edited and laid out by a designer, but it has been written. So if I can help you with that, answer any other questions you might have with your tanks, that's what we're here for at Purdue. That's what we're supposed to do in extension, is to be able to give you the best answers that we can provide to you based on science or experience. I mean, it goes both ways. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and I said, appreciate you listening. Hope there's a couple of points that you can take out of this talk, and at least make you more aware of what you might need to be asking. So with that, thanks for listening.